Oh my God, has anybody kept up with that guy?
He stopped teaching and now he
I think he like ran a jewelry store for. He hit me on LinkedIn a couple years ago,
yeah,
like
he was
maybe
doing
a
some
couple
weird
years
shit on
ago now.
LinkedIn.
I was like, this codes, I guess. Yeah,
Yeah, it
Yeah.
checked out. I never had Keston. I
He was a
wish I
funny
did.
dude.
Yeah,
he was a funny dude.
what class was he? He was your film studies, right?
I
He
had regular.
was yeah, he
Yeah,
was just English. Yeah.
Okay, okay,
No,
yeah.
we
Like
had Chronovit for our film class. That was a journey.
Right.
yeah, that dude was wild.
Yeah,
That dude was a trip.
I wish I had Sturpey. I never had Sturpey either.
I've only heard stories.
I think
Yeah.
he's like a principal now
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
at the high school.
He's doing well for himself.
Screenagers, we are back yet again with another amazing episode of the Canon. My name is Raf. We've got another great episode lined up for you today. Another essential movie. Very excited about this one. Very excited about the guests who are going to be joining me to talk about this movie. We've got one returning guest and we've got one new one. But both of these gents are, film minds who I respect and admire greatly. I've known both of these guys for way too long. I think more than like half of my life, maybe longer. Pretty insane to think that we're now all here talking about Get Out. But boys, welcome back to the show, David Cohan, and welcome first time guest Christopher Reed Brown. I can't say like the short version because then people would be like, wait, what? No, not that guy. Not Chris Brown. The one and only Christopher Reed Brown. But how are you guys doing? Welcome and welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks, man. Happy to be back.
This is
Good to be here.
hell yeah. That was your sexy radio voice.
Yeah. Hi, welcome. I'm Christopher Reed Brown. Not to be confused with the guy who closed the door on Rihanna.
That's a good voice. I should have worked. Like, this is my third time back, and you think I would have worked on it by now?
Yeah, I don't have anything else. That's about all I have as a voice actor.
That was good though. I also like, so this is audio only, but for everyone listening, Chris did grab a fake microphone that he was speaking into when he was doing that voice, even though he has a real microphone that he could have grabbed. But that's
It was
acting.
good. It added to the moment.
So, all right, before we get into Get Out, we'll quickly mention, so Dave, you've been on the show before, so people may have heard previous episodes that you've been on and sort of know, your background within the film industry. But Mr. Christopher Reed, for folks who, well, I guess for everyone, this is their first time hearing you on the show. Why don't you give us like a quick overview and background of like what it is that you do and why you're so good at doing fake radio voices?
Yeah, I'm a voiceover actor. I started doing theater actually with David Cohan right here in high school, and that was my introduction into the arts. I went to NYU. I mainly went into a theater conservatory, so kind of focused on Shakespeare and more stage performance. And for the first like 5-10 years out of school, I was kind of doing shows in theaters around the country, just kind of doing regional theater. But in the last 5 years or so, I've been doing a lot more film and TV, trying to focus more on that. And so, as an actor, I think a lot of people would agree you just kind of do what you book. So I am a voiceover actor, but it really becomes just kind of throwing spaghetti on a wall, which definitely is great because it allows you to absorb a lot of media. So I think that is why I'm very excited to be here with you.
Hell yeah.
Because, especially this movie for a black actor was really important in terms of like following Lakeith Stanfield's career and going, ooh, I want to do that one.
Yeah.
This was a big one for a lot of black actors, I think, especially American black actors, even though, not everybody in this movie was American.
Yeah. Ooh, that's
how
a sour point. Yeah.
Yeah.
But thanks for giving us that little background. You're probably too humble to mention it, but you were in a couple of pretty big, cool movies in the last couple of years. You were in one with Zachary Quinto, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was my daddy.
Yeah, he played your...
But what's cooler is Audra McDonald was my mama. And a lot of people call Audra McDonald mom, like in the Gen Z kind of way.
Yeah.
She was my mom. Like, okay, for real. And that's probably my biggest, like, proud moment as a actor. Is like,
I was going nuts when I saw you were doing that. That's so cool.
I'm like patting Audra McDonald on the back as she's crying. I'm like, don't worry, Ma, it's all good. And I was like, this is surreal. But it is funny because it's you don't think the moment you meet somebody who's this like big actor is going to be the big moment, but then you meet somebody who actually speaks to you, and it was wild. She had her lines down better than the person who wrote the script. Really incredible actress. Really cool to be a part of that. But that was this movie Down Low, and he's referring to this movie, Greatest Beer Run Ever, or the two movies, if you're going to look something up, that have been recent.
Awesome. So, and then the other movie that you were mentioning that you were in was Greatest Beer Run with Zac Efron and some other sort of big names. Were they cool, or was that also like too cool for school kind of deal?
It was great. It was I think that was a bigger, the project I was just talking about with Audra McDonald was a smaller project done by Lucas Gage, and I felt like I was able to really, really kind of hone in on the craft more there than in the Greatest Beer Run, because it was this bigger picture with Pete Farrelly. And so it was just like I was a cog in a wheel there, which is what, should be the case. So it was kind of just moving through the bits. But I had a scene with Bill Murray, and it was, I think the weird part about what I never thought would happen is you're starstruck, but that has to go away really quickly so that you can like actually remember, the bits of the scene. And that took me a second. It took me a little bit of a, kind of an adjustment to go like, okay, but he's expecting you to say something back. So
yeah, you can't be like, yo, this is Bill Murray. You have to act.
Yeah, you have to actually, and sometimes you have to like say something mean to him and piss him off, and he gets pissed off in a couple of the takes. And I just remember being like, okay, he's not mad at you. He's not mad at you. He's just a racist from 1960s, and he's playing that part. Just let it be. But great experiences. But I think, as a lot of actors can attest to, it's they're very few and far between. So you just kind of like take what you can get and absorb what you can learn from these professionals in the career.
Hell yeah. Well, I feel like we've talked about Greatest Beer Run, and I haven't seen the other movie, but I think by all accounts you're great in both. So
thanks.
People should definitely check out your work there. And then David, for folks who maybe haven't heard some of the other episodes that you were on, you want to just, run through what it is that you do and some of the work that, that you've done that people can check out.
Oh yeah, I work at Sony Pictures ImageWorks, which is an animation and VFX company. We do work for Sony Pictures, and we also we've done work for other clients too. So some of our stuff pops up on Netflix. We've done Warner Brothers stuff, all kinds of different things. Probably the big ones I've worked on were both Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse and Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. I did a couple different things on those. I work on the production side, so I help manage the artists and stuff like that. I don't do any of the artwork myself, but I kind of like it that way. I like kind of being close to the talent, but also not having my paycheck, determined by my artwork or that kind of thing. So yeah, I did the Spider-Verse movies. Honestly, probably the other big one I get a lot is people really like that I worked on the Meg, which was like I always think
Oh
about it as
yeah.
like a funny little footnote, but every time I mention the Meg, they're like, "Yo!" So we did like because these things get split between different studios, so we did about like pretty much the last 8 minutes of that movie. So like mostly like the part where Statham punches the shark in the face is the part we did, and like I still I'll hang that on the rafters for sure.
That's
And
huge.
and yeah, no, so I'm still working there, and now I'm working on a movie for Netflix called K-pop Demon Hunters, and I'm under NDA, so I don't think there's a lot more I can say about it besides that. I do believe there is like a small featurette somewhere on the internet about it that might show a couple clips. I really should have queued up this plug better. But
Honestly, the
but
name
you
is
know,
enough. Like if,
Yeah.
if people aren't sold by K-pop Demon Hunters, like
Yeah. It's like,
yeah, and like what I will say is
what
like
are you
if you're into K-pop, it's a really cool thing. Like we're definitely like working with a lot of people really knowledgeable on the subject and kind of creating something close to the experience that K-pop fans have. So like I think people who like it will really enjoy that, and I think people who don't know anything about K-pop will also really like it because I mean there's the Demon Hunters end of it, and that's fun for everybody. And like maybe next time I'll be able to say more about it, but that's all I can give up confidently for now.
That's awesome. All amazing stuff. Very like so people now know we have someone who has worked on Academy Award winning films and someone who has worked with Academy Award. Well, I guess you guys have both worked with Academy Award winning filmmakers. So
Chris definitely more
Probably-
directly.
I thought you were going to be like, we have somebody who worked on like Academy Award winning films, and we have Christopher Brown. I was like, he can really cook. He can cook me right now.
but you shared a screen with Bill Murray, which is pretty cool. That's more than the rest of us can say. But David has held an Oscar for a film that he worked on, which is also more than the rest of us can say. So yeah.
Not my Oscar. Peter Ramsey let us take a picture with it, but thank you to Peter for that. He's a nice guy.
It's yours. You worked on the movie. You were a crucial part in why that movie was as successful as it was.
Right.
So
So
you
give
I'm
us
earned
going to
that.
tell them that the next time I ask for a promotion.
So this guy Raph, he says that I deserve all the money in the world if that means anything.
I have known him for 15 years, so that that might play a role in it. But
There you go.
Yeah, so I think no shade to any of our other amazing, wonderful, talented, and super thoughtful guests who have been on, but I think you guys are sort of your bona fides are up there with anyone else's. So I think what that means, and hopefully I'm not overselling for what's to come, but I think that means that we're going to have a pretty insightful conversation about one of the best movies of the last 10 years, 20 years, 25 years, 50 years. Like this movie for me is something that's super special. So I am interested to talk about it with you guys and pick your brains to see if it's as special for both of you as it is for me. So I guess in order to sort of get us started with that, because this is kind of like a unique case in terms of a movie in the canon where it's something that came out in the last couple of years. So like we were all adults when this came out and like have like recollection of like anticipation for this movie. So Chris, we'll start with you. Like, were you aware of this movie before it came out? Were you like hyped to see it? Did you have thoughts about it before? Like, did you see it in theaters? Sort of walk us through where you were with all that stuff.
yeah, obviously I was, I'm sure all three of us were big fans of Jordan Peele before this movie came out. So this movie was like, it spoke to, I think one of the main things, I'm going to move my mic a little closer because I think I'm kind of quiet. Yeah. Give me one sec. But I think one of the things I kind of picked up on was excited about was the fact that Jordan Peele was switching, his genre. So I think that was everybody's like big, exciting, reason to go see this was all of a sudden you saw that Jordan Peele, who was just doing Key and Peele for so long, had so many different sides to him that we had no idea about. So, I think it was really nice to see an actor with the mind that he has to realize he was also a director and a writer and all of these other things. It was really special and made me want to go see this even more, because, you think about how many, older black actors also do other things and wear other hats. Because if like Jeffrey Wright was writing films, I'd be like, shit, I can't wait to go see his films.
Yeah.
And so, to be able to go, oh, wow, this person clearly is a really creative thinker. I go back to some of these Key and Peele's where they're in space and, and they've gone so deep in these concepts where they're like, talking quietly about, saying things to their partners and shit. And it's like, and I said, floating out into space. That guy's making a fucking like horror film. And, I think that obviously that was what I was most excited about, was here is this creative who he's got more for us. And then Twilight Zone came later, and it was like all of these new things that he was doing were exciting,
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that was like the big sort of like draw of the movie.
Yeah.
David, I don't know if you had similar thoughts when this was sort of coming out in terms of like your anticipation for it.
Yeah, I definitely did. I mean, it arrived with a ton of hype behind it already. I can't remember if it was a screening at festivals or something before then, but I remember like seeing the marketing for it and having it being really ambiguous. Like I knew it was Jordan Peele. Like I knew it was obvious. I think there was like a quick trailer for it that was like, like sort of indicated that it was going to be creepy, but like not much as far as like what the actual plot concerned directly. And so I remember like pretty much from that early marketing going like, oh, this is something different. Like this isn't just going to be like a straight up slasher film or something like that. It's obviously creepy. It's obviously Jordan Peele, but it's like, it was really hard to get a sense of what exactly it was about. But I was excited, for the same reasons Chris mentioned, like I think it's really interesting when people with comedy backgrounds try to foray into this. I also, like, we'll probably get into it more later. Like, I think there's actually like a really, really, really thin line between horror and comedy and like those kinds of sensibilities informing that sort of filmmaking. So, and I think Get Out kind of proved that, so I remember thinking even at the time, like, this could actually be really good. Like, it could be a really interesting way to go through it. I mean, like the only, I knew Key and Peele obviously, and I know he did Keanu, which is kind of an insane movie.
That was before Get Out. Wow,
I believe so, and I can't remember if he actually directed it or if it was just their movie. But I knew that they were very creative people, and him and Key were both creative people, and like very, very like knowledgeable about the stuff they approach. So I knew it was probably going to be a really unique watch. I was glad it was even better than I thought it was, and like the cultural moment it became after that, I think was all really nice to see play out. But yeah, at the beginning, it was just sort of like, okay, I know Jordan Peele. Oh, and the Daniel Kaluuya connection for sure, because I'd seen him in Black Mirror, and I'm honestly not the biggest Black Mirror fan, but like the episode, I know, I'm sorry. But
that
episode is really good, and him in it, he's just unbelievable in that. So I remember seeing that, and I just being like, who is this guy? I hadn't really seen any of the British stuff he'd been on. So when I saw he was in this movie, I was like, okay, that's like even more of a reason to check it out.
Mm-hmm. And from the, casting side, what genius casting in terms of picking up on his ability, because his role in that Black Mirror episode is very synonymous in terms of like this, alt future that, that he exists in, and he plays this character where he's like becomes this like cult hit on basically Xbox Live or whatever the equivalent is, for like threatening to kill himself. And it's obviously it's not the same idea as Get Out, but it's the casting understood. This guy can play really high stakes in weird sci-fi scenarios. And think that's a high five to that casting director from Get Out.
Yeah, I hadn't seen that Black Mirror episode before seeing this movie, so I wasn't like super familiar with Daniel Kaluuya. I actually don't think I do enjoy Black Mirror, and I don't think I've seen that episode.
The second of the first so
season. I have to peep for sure. Yeah. Just to quickly walk you guys through sort of like what I was thinking when this movie first came out. So we're all 32. So we were very much so of the generation that was like raised comedically by Chappelle's show.
Right.
Like very much so informed a lot of like our generation's comedic sensibilities.
Yeah.
Like I can quote Chappelle's show until the end of time. So when Key and Peele like first came out, I was like, this is just knockoff Chappelle. This is like a not as funny version of the Chappelle show with like two light-skinned dudes who aren't nearly as funny or like creative or bold as what Dave Chappelle was doing years ago. I've since changed my opinion. I think that show like actually is very smart and layered and like extremely well made. But that was like kind of always my thinking and like approach to that show.
Yeah.
And then I saw Keanu when it came out in theaters, like pissed drunk on a Sunday afternoon. Don't ask me why I was pissed drunk on a Sunday afternoon. That's a story for another day. But I saw that movie and I was like, this sucks. Like these guys are not funny versions of Dave Chappelle. And they made a not funny movie with a cat and Method Man. And I don't like it. And now I'm seeing a trailer for one of them directing a horror movie. That's going to be stupid. There's no way that that's going to succeed. It won't be good at all. And then all the festival buzz, like people being like, oh, this is actually like one of the best movies of like the last 20 years or whatever. Like early reviews, all super positive. And I was like, you know what? Screw it. I'll go see it. Saw it opening weekend. I believe I took a date, happened to be a white girl, and I was absolutely blown away. I was like, oh my God, this is the realest thing to ever exist.
I have to go home.
Yeah. Lose my number.
Yeah. Never invite me to meet your family. I want absolutely none of it.
And if you live in Massachusetts, we're done.
Yeah, we're absolutely done. You're cooked.
Love.
Yeah. Get out of here. And I don't know if part of the reason why I was so blown away was because my expectations were like so low going into it. But I feel like I was like the only person in the world who going into this movie was like, you know, I don't know if I'm that in on it, and like had like a full complete 180 sort of spin. So it is interesting to hear both of you guys just being like, yeah, we were kind of hype. Like,
yeah,
you both enjoyed Key and Peele and were like interested to see what he was doing next. Whereas I was like coming out of Keanu, like I never want to hear from either of these guys ever again.
I think that's one of the key things to kind of remember in the and I'll do a soapbox moment for 1 second. I'll never do it again in this podcast. But I think that is the problem with cinema today is that studio heads will detect true talent, true visionary talent, and they'll say, I'm going to make a blanket movie about bullshit and put the true visionary talent in that movie. And I don't know if you're right. I don't know if Jordan directed. I
don't think he did.
I don't think he did either. And if he did, I don't think he was the originator of that concept. And I can't speak to that. But that was a studio film. And what it did was it capitalized on the skills of these two artists, and yet it wasn't their. Because they had to base their skills around property that wasn't theirs, you didn't get to actually see their real talents. And so that's why I thought Get Out was such an important film, because it taught other artists that like you kind of have to do it yourself in a way if you really want to be, if you want your intelligence to be seen. Stephen King had the same thing. Stephen King, you know, Alfred Hitchcock is another example of like, you have to build your own shorts and do your own things if you want your ideas to actually come out the way you see them, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. It is coming out of like Key and Peele. I think people, at least for me, I don't know if you guys felt the same way. Like I always thought that Key would have the more successful career, but that was because we didn't know that Jordan Peele was also a like extremely thoughtful, intelligent, gifted writer and director who had this like deep well of knowledge about the horror genre and like wanted to add his own entry into it. Yeah. It was just like, yeah, Key is like way more charismatic. He like has like a much better screen presence. Like he's going to be the one who's going to go on to do bigger and better things once this show is over. But Peele really like took everything into his own hands, and he was like, no, I'm going to show you guys that I'm like one of the best directors of this like new generation of Hollywood talent.
And you could do that, or you could do Schmigadoon. And he is incredible in Schmigadoon, and I love Schmigadoon. But if you're gonna do Schmigadoon, you're gonna do their ideas, and you're gonna dance the dance, and that's great. But it is the difference. Is like that's and I think he is incredible at manipulating other people's work and making it his own and making it hilarious.
Yeah.
But that's a great point, is like, the difference in what you would expect versus what actually ends up happening.
It's also funny because Schmigadoon's a very real show that I'm very aware of, but every time you say it, it sounds like a completely made up show.
It kind of is. It's actually great. Caroline, my wife,
it's really good.
It's a great show. But it's also so not Key's like IP. It's like, and you could see, and and that's okay. But Jordan's like, no, he just went in very different directions.
So the movie it comes out, we all see it, everyone's blown away. They're like, this is the best horror movie of whatever last 15 years. David, what like initially stood out to you as like what made this movie so great and different from so much else that had come before it?
Well, it was, it was, as we've been talking about, it just feels like such a huge jump, by any measure, to see Jordan Peele doing something of this pedigree versus what he had done. Not to put down his comedy work or anything like that. There's an importance for all of it, but it really immediately felt like this was a significant film, in a lot of ways. It's like this is going to be talked about by a lot of people who've never even heard of Key and Peele or don't know who this guy is. This is going to kind of put him in circles that he hadn't been in before. We really are like immediately going to have like filmmaker auteur conversations about Jordan Peele, which is a hell of a thing to do on your first movie, it was, I really appreciated how, I'm careful to say that it like balances a lot of genres, because sometimes when I talk to people, really especially white people, who are like, well, it's not really a horror movie. I'm like, what the fuck? Of course it's a horror movie, but maybe not for you, but I'm like, no, it's unequivocally a horror movie. So like, I try to be careful when I say that it like does a lot of different things. So I don't want to take away from the fact that like, in my opinion, it is a capital H horror movie, but like it really does cover a lot of ground. I think like a lot of good horror, it really opens up a lot of conversation, and I think there's points where it's extremely funny, and kind of going back to what I said about like finding this really great balance between comedy and horror, where like both can work hand in hand rather than one taking away from the other. I think that's really, really hard to do, but it kind of like, when you do it well, it feels like a successful high wire act. So like, I walked out of that theater like totally buzzing and like really excited to talk to everybody else about it, just because like it felt unique for horror. It felt unique for a comedy actor, writer, to do it. It just like kind of in all ways. And the fact that like it was immediately getting awards buzz, for something that like typically is like not really like the establishment type awards film, like it felt daring in a lot of ways, which was really exciting to me and still is.
Yeah.
With that, like awards buzz stuff, like this movie was released in February, like this, which is like typically a time where you're like, okay, that's kind of like just like whatever movies, like sort of like throwaway movies that aren't going to make a ton for the studio, aren't going to be getting like a ton of awards buzz or anything. I don't know if they were doing like a Black History Month sort of release thing, or if it really was just like where like this movie is, a super low budget horror movie, like might like break even, but won't, be something that's talked about at the end of the year for awards, or something that's going to like make us a considerable amount of money. And it ended up doing both, which is pretty insane. But Chris, back to you. Sir, what were like some of the initial things that like immediately stood out to you that you felt like made this movie super special?
Yeah. I think David brings up a great point that it is capital H, a horror, and I was laughing obviously throughout a lot of it, but I think especially comparative to, and I guess this is not what I was thinking going in, so I shouldn't really go deep into this, but comparatively to us and to Nope, it's really about the African American experience, and like a very specific African American experience in like a neoliberal white world. And like, I think that's what stood out to me the most, was like, you know, in a world where there is such blatant racism, it was really wild to dive into this story about like, you're getting duped by, you know, this, what you think is this like neoliberal white family from, you know, from like, where are they driving up to? Is it Massachusetts? I don't remember where.
I think it's just like generic, like suburbia.
I say
think
Massachusetts,
it's the East Coast area, but I'm not
right.
quite sure they ever say what city it is, and I think that's the point.
Yeah,
it's like Mass, like upstate New York, kind of like
New England.
stand in for all of that. Yeah,
it doesn't feel like the South, so it's like, you know, and it's like, it's so quickly. Oh, that's interesting. They're driving north. This horror is going to happen, assumingly in this like, like patriot world, you know, very, very, you know, Salem, Plymouth world. And, and, you know, and then for it to be this feeling of like, you know, I think Raph, you said it before, you went on a date with a white person. For a black person that's been with white people and is married to a white person, just put that out there. You know, it didn't sway me that much. Clearly, I was fine, but it did get. And I'm kidding, but it did. It gave me this like. It gave me this feeling of like, that is a real feeling. Okay. That's not just me thinking that. And I think that was the big takeaway, was like, how do you aggrandize this concept that is like built in microaggressions, and how do you make this movie, this horror movie about what really is hard to talk on, because it's often built in microaggressions or you know, these smaller moments that aren't, you know, stealing people's souls.
Yeah,
and, you know, but I think walking away, I had to like turn my shoulder a little bit, like, oh shit, someone's watching, you know?
Yeah, no, I mean, right. And I think it is really interesting to have both of you guys on, because like we all sort of like have like different experiences like within the real world. And then like, I think everyone, obviously for like every movie, you're bringing your own personal experience to something. So I do think that there are ways that non-Black audience members can very much so connect with this movie and like a lot of the feelings of paranoia and stuff. But to watch it as a Black person who like occupies white spaces, like dates, you know, white women, and has like been in situations where I'm meeting an entire extended family at a party, and I'm like, I get that all of you guys are being nice, but it all feels super fucking weird. Like everything that you're saying to me, I know that you're trying to be chill, but it still feels kind of weird.
Oh, you want me to go to the wine cellar with you? Oh,
yeah. Like,
okay.
Like an ex-girlfriend, I met her whole family at this like large, you know, extended family party, and her grandma comes up to me and she was like super nice and super chill. And she said something like extremely innocuous that like should not be taken as a microaggression or like a form of like slight racism at all. And she was like, "Oh, he is tall." And I was like, "What does that mean?" You know? And that like that feeling that this movie creates of that like kind of paranoia that I think so many Black Americans like unfortunately like walk through the world with is like communicated in such a clear way. That it's like, for me, I feel like for me, it's like, wow, this is like super special. Like I feel seen in this movie, but I also think for people who have never experienced that, you're like, you get it by just watching the movie. And it's never like explicitly stated, but the way that Kalia will like, you know, change his facial expression when someone says something, or just like give like tilt his head and like, you know, like squint his eyes. And it's like all communicated through these like very slight gestures.
Yeah.
Is such an amazing feat of filmmaking to like communicate all of that stuff within an hour and 45 minutes. And you're like, this is, you know, liberal white racism in the 21st century in an hour and 45 minutes. And that's like an extremely complex issue to tackle in such a short period of time. So it is really amazing that all of that like comes through and is also done in a way that is like genuinely scary for just like film fans, but also can be kind of funny. David, sort of going back to what you were saying of like this like weird like balancing act of like from like moment to moment, right? Like there's a moment where he's like talking to Rod on the phone and it's hilarious. Like Rod is just like saying the most hilarious stuff. He's like, "Oh, bro, you and some eyes wide shut type shit." And then it cuts back to like the family like lurking in the living room with like very eerie music playing and like these like low lights on them. And it's like, how do you cut back and forth between both of those moments? And I go from like laughing to feeling this fear instantly.
Yeah.
I don't have a follow-up question there. I feel like there are going to be a lot of times in this episode where I just start rambling because that's what this movie does to me. I think we should go back to the Daniel Kaluuya of it all. Because I feel like that casting and a lot of the other casting is really inspired, but like his performance in particular is super special. So, David, I'm just curious to hear, like, you said that you were interested in the movie because of, seeing him in Black Mirror, but like, just like what you thought of what he does is like to like anchor this entire movie.
Oh, I mean, I think one of the main reasons this movie works is because of him. I mean, like, so much pressure is put on him as an actor to kind of carry this whole thing, and like, I think somebody who can't, it's kind of what you both are saying, like it's in the subtle ways that he reacts to things, like a lot of his body language really, tells so much of a story here, and it's like it's such a complicated thing to have to be like scared and suspicious and have your guard up, but also like kind of trying to ingratiate yourself a little bit. And it's like I really think there aren't a lot of actors who would have been able to balance it as well as he did. And I mean, it's just really like it's one of my favorite performances of the last like 20 years. I mean, he's really like obviously in scenes like where he's being hypnotized and he goes into the sunken place, that's a major like visceral moment. But even just when he's kind of walking around with like Bradley Whitford or Catherine Keener, and kind of having to pretend he's part of this, and like that none of this is weird, even though all of it is so clearly weird. And like I think a lot of people would overplay it or a lot of people would underplay it, but he's just got that like perfect level of subtlety that really carries through the whole thing. And it's a testament to the great casting in this film for sure. Like I think obviously he's really well cast. I also think Bradley Whitford and Catherine Keener are like really deliberate casting. I think these are two really good actors who you kind of more know for like, like one of them's the guy from West Wing, and like, like Catherine Keener's the 40-Year-Old Virgin. They're sort of like these fun people usually in most movies are in. I think it's kind of meant to disarm you a little bit when you see them. And then all of a sudden, like some of the subtleties start to creep in, and I think like between that and Daniel Kaluuya's performance, like it really does a great job of making you feel, even if you don't have the same lived-in experience, of actually doing this, like you really feel unsettled and like something's really wrong, and like the walls are kind of starting to close in, like well before you hear, anything about the procedure or the auction or anything like that. Like it does a great job of like really setting up this sort of unease almost from the first scene.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I think Bradley Whitford is in a lot of ways reminded me of interactions I've had in the workplace, and I think the two of them as her parents you're right, did a great job of being very, very seemingly one thing. But knowing from the beginning that this is what the movie is probably going to be pointing towards, it was really masterfully done in a way that you didn't know when or what was happening, or and I think that like Bradley Whitford's character kind of gave me this feeling of like, I know you're evil, but damn, you're so good at even from the beginning, because I didn't know she was evil from the beginning. I thought maybe I didn't know, but you can tell that there was this ability to navigate spaces seemingly compliment. It makes me think of what Raph said. Oh, you are tall. That's what both of those reactions kind of, what he said there, it very much made me think of their performances. And like, I don't know if I still feel like I can pick that out in my reality when somebody is just blowing smoke up my ass, you know, or actually giving me compliment or, you know, and it just made you aware of it. Just made you like blatantly aware, like, ooh, people could be just blowing smoke up your ass.
Yeah.
I think, David, your point about the casting being like deliberate with those two of like, these are like friendly people, like people who we associate with like, oh yeah, like they've always been the cool person in whatever it is that I'm watching, like someone who I want to chill with. But they both are able to play like, I've got a layer of, Chris, like you're saying, like I've got this like layer of like sinister, like hiding like just beneath the surface, but like I'll give you like a sneak peek in, but not a whole lot. It's just beyond Daniel Kaluuya, like the casting and the acting is all like it feels extremely deliberate, and also all of like the like subtleties in the acting performances are amazing. Even like rewatching it this time around, like oh my god, what's the name of the woman who plays Rose?
Allison Williams, I think.
Yeah,
Allison Williams. Like she low key knocked it out of the park too.
Incredible.
Where you like slowly start to see like, oh, this character is putting on a performance, and that is like very much so her role within this family dynamic.
I think that was the biggest reveal of the whole movie, was realizing she was in on it too. Because, you know, I think a part of me thought this is going to be a story about a girl's family who's like this, and they get out together.
Yeah.
And then you realize, no, she lured him here.
That's the hopeful side of you being a black guy married to a white woman, where you're like, there's still hope for her.
That's right.
She'll save me from her evil family.
Right.
Yeah, I took it for me as like a kind of a blind spot as a white person. I was like, well, surely she's fine, you know. Like,
Right. And also great casting on her part too, because her last role was, I believe, maybe not the last role. It definitely wasn't her last role, but her last big role in the world of, you know, at least people who recognize her as girls. And so, again, innocuous is such a great word, Raph, for this, because I think what they did so well in casting, where they casted people that were innocuous as the white individuals in this, that couldn't be evil. You know, her role in Girls is, you know, she's often the victim in Girls. So, you know, or at least she calls herself the victim a lot in Girls. And so, you know, it was this role of like, okay, that, you know, if there are so many other people, if they casted Alison Brie, I would have been like, ooh, she's in on it. And I would have just known.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I just would have known. I don't know what that difference is. And it's kind of bullshit because I'm typecasting in that case. And I hate typecasting, but there is a goal in casting people who you haven't seen do that before.
Yeah. In like she plays the like chill girl who you want to, you know, take on a date or whatever, like really well. And
kind, you know,
yeah, she plays it up, like the scene where she's like yelling at the officer. You're like, yeah, she's a nice, cool girlfriend. And it's like, you're right. Like, I don't know that a lot of actors would like either like be able to deliver that performance or like bring that same sort of like weight and like past baggage to the role that she does.
Without
the way she like switches on a dime at the end to like that like cool calculating sort of evil, you know, and like putting the pictures up behind her like they're hunting trophies and like that kind of, it feels so natural, you know, but also so terrifying because it's so natural.
Right. Her switch is very 180 degrees. You're right.
Yeah. It's so good.
It's very et tu brute, you know?
Yeah. You had to bring in your Shakespeare.
Yeah, you know, once.
Yeah.
Give me that.
At least something. The other, so like, I'm sure like we'll continue to talk about all of the, you know, social commentary within this movie, but I feel like the other thing that makes this movie great is that it's kind of like r/movie details porn. I don't know if either of you guys have been on that subreddit where it's just like, and in this scene, this one thing happens, and that means, you know, blah 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 blah, and then like that points to like this like foreshadows this other thing that's going to happen. Like
the spoon represents.
Yeah. Like this movie is like, you could write an entire book of like r/movie details shit that is within this, like everything from like the deer to the spoon to the hunting trophies, which like wasn't even something that I thought of. David, like, you know, like skins on the wall or whatever, which then like also goes back to the deer. But one of the elements of that I thought was kind of interesting that I quickly want to pick your guys' brains on is the music. I don't know if you guys have like read or heard anything about some of the musical choices that are made within this movie, and like what your thoughts are on all that.
I read up a good bit on the guy who did the score for this movie, and I guess most notably in this movie, like kind of the opening sort of theme song, for lack of a better term. And that song is I so apologize for how I'm about to pronounce this, but it's a Sikilitsa Kura Wahenga. And basically, like, the rough translation is "listen to your ancestors" in Swahili. And so basically, it's kind of meant to serve as this sort of ghost choir, kind of telling Dana Kaluuya basically to get the hell out of there. So like I think the lines are like, brother, run for your life, listen to your ancestors, get out of there. Like kind of as a rough translation. And so like I thought that was really interesting to pick up on, because in some ways, I think the way it was deployed, you could kind of get a sense of that before you even knew the translation of it. It was supposed to be this sort of feeling of unease and sort of this ghostly choir coming through. But reading up on that, I thought was really interesting, for sure. And the composer is, I have a bit more on him later, but the composer is super interesting as well. Kind of to break open some of his work.
Nice. Yeah, I didn't know that about the Swahili song, but also Redbone, which is like, extremely on the nose in the lyrics, similar to like to the other song that you mentioned, but also like it works and like it doesn't feel out of place, and like it was also extremely timely. Like when the movie came out, like Redbone was huge at that time, and it sort of felt like this like cool like merging of like two guys who have proven that they can tackle like deep subject matter in a lot of different media, like TV, film, music. Like Childish Gambino is like similar to Jordan Peele in that he's able to like occupy like a lot of spaces as a creative person. But yeah, Chris, I don't know if you had any other thoughts on any of the music choices.
Yeah, I think the lyrics of Redbone are really interesting for this because, and I think I didn't even know, and it's interesting because what David just said kind of changed my point on it even more than what I was thinking before. But the fact that it's Swahili, the translation is in Swahili, it really does speak to the African American experience in this way. That's like, it's so clearly dividing this line, and not as in one's good, one's bad, but having an African American artist like Childish Gambino, and then having translated Swahili from the composer is that's the intro song, Dave?
Yeah, like after when Lakeith Stanfield gets attacked, it's like kind of the song playing as they run the opening credits, and then it shows up a couple more times.
Right. And I think in this is a point I was going to make later, but the music does it, so I think it's a cool thing to bring up, is that there is this reminder that America has created a different breed of African that is now implanted in white America, and therefore different, and therefore like seen differently. And the more ingrained that African is into American society, the more sunken they are. So the fact that there's rap, and I guess Childish Gambino is more than just rap, but because Redbone's not really, it's hip hop, but it really speaks to that idea of like, what's the difference? How have we changed? And is a certain amount of ingraining based on the commentary of the music and the movie? Is it bad? Is it bad to be ingrained? And that's why African American music is really interesting to have alongside, music in Swahili.
Yeah, That is really interesting. I hadn't thought about that part, like the idea of like how this movie is commenting not just on like the African American experience, but sort of how it is connected to like the larger African experience and like how different those things are. Because it is like, you know, you could make a whole other movie that is like just exploring that issue. And Chris, I feel like also kind of ties back to what you mentioned before, where like Daniel Kaluuya is an English actor. He's I forgot where his parents are from. They're not Nigerian.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
But yeah, like the experience of like a like African English, or like an English person with like African like immigrant parents is like very different than the experience of like the Chris character in this movie, or like Lakeith Stanfield in real life.
Right. They should have used Stormzy, not Childish Gambino.
Yeah. Yes, bro.
Yes, bro. No, but and obviously there are definitely, and I knew we were going to get into this, but there are links in the experience, but it is a vastly different experience. But I also agree with David that not a lot of actors, period, regardless of where they are, could have handled the stakes of this role. So, yeah. And the same actor goes and does Fred Hampton, which is one of the most American individuals you can immortalize, you know. And so, you know, I got to give the homie credit. Like,
he's taking American jobs, though.
Yeah. Yes.
So.
Yes. But
we should deport him.
But I'll tell you though, he's doing a good job. And like when I saw him do Fred Hampton, even more than Get Out, I was like, and again, I don't need to get into that, but I was like, wow, this is a uniquely African-American experience. Mm-hmm. Before it was too, but this is like but if you can handle the stakes of a situation, that for a movie is 90% of the job. It really is. If you can handle that position, I think that speaks volumes to your right to play it. Mm-hmm. And that's coming from an African-American artist, you know, who, you know, would want that type of role. I wouldn't have been competing with him, but you know.
No, for sure. It is really interesting how sort of like all of those things are in play at the same time. Sort of on a similar note, going back to something else that you said, Chris, which I think is like probably the most interesting part of like how this movie is playing with race relations in the US, is that the horror of racism that we're exploring here is a very particular kind of like, I think Jordan Peele describes it as this like post-racial lie of the post-Obama era, or like of the Obama era. Also like insane timing that this movie came out the year after Obama left office, like within the first couple of months of the Trump era, which like, you know, whatever it is that we want to say about like all of these different presidents, like movies very much so exist within the context of, especially in America, of like the presidential regimes that they come out in. Like every movie in the 80s, you're like, yeah, that's a Reagan era movie. Or like you see Transformers and you're like, yes, that is a Bush era film.
Yeah.
And this is like the first movie that is like a Trump era movie. But that's not the point. Like the point is that it could have been about a racism that is like blatantly scary and horrible, which is like 12 Years a Slave, right? Where it's just like, oh yeah, slavery is like the most horrifying thing that anyone can experience. I get that. Yeah. But it's like even scarier to make it about this Northeast, like New York Times cooking section subscription kind of white liberal person.
Because we know Mississippi burning. We know what that fear is.
Yeah.
We've studied that fear. And this fear was unlocking new ideas that we're just forming as a country. These ideas of, it's almost like I want to open it up to you two to ask, like, from both of your perspectives. Like, I want to hear, David, what was horrifying about the movie and what was shameful? Because for me, the horrifying part was like when homie was running towards him and I was like, okay, he's so entrenched in this that there are other people that are already lost, and he's got to deal with that. And then what was shameful was like, am I feeding into breaking away from my roots by being engrossed
Are
in
you
white
the
America?
runner?
Am I Lakeith Stanfield? So that was like my shame, and my fear was like being surrounded. What was your fear when you were watching this draft? I want to ask you too, but I want to hear what David's was, just because it's so, it's got to be so
You
different.
just hijacked the show for me.
My bad.
But no, it is a good question.
I'd say it's cool that this is like kind of a New Rochelle reunion for this show, because hopefully this translates to people listening to this not from there. But it was really interesting for me to watch this movie as a white person who grew up in New Rochelle, because I feel like it a lot of ways, even though it's not like uniformly as upper class as this community seemed to be, like it really in a lot of ways felt like a horror movie that could have been set where I lived. I think there was really this idea growing up in New Rochelle, especially if you grow up in like a white liberal family in New Rochelle, that like, like we live in a very diverse town. I go to school with a lot of people who don't look like me. And like, I do feel extremely fortunate and blessed to have had that experience. I think there's a lot of internal baggage that I know other people have had to overcome, that like, I just like, I felt really fortunate that a lot of my friends didn't look like me, didn't have the same, backgrounds as I did, or the same experiences. And I think I learned a lot from that. But I do think, there's sort of this sense among people who live there. It's like, oh, like racism isn't really a thing over here. Like, like we all vote for Obama 3 times if we could. And, and like, we go to school, and like not everyone looks like us. So it's great, and like, I think it really, I was aware of this before I saw this movie, but it was really eye-opening in a way of just like how that kind of subtle racism can still play in, and how, honestly, hopefully not the part about switching people's brains and that kind of thing, but like, like honestly, how a lot of racism probably permeated through our town. Like, obviously, there's classic racism in New Rochelle too. Like,
right.
I'm not going to say that like nobody was just like calling people the N-word and stuff, but
right.
like, there's a lot of that sort of like
full real,
subtle, like like kind of grandstanding sort of like, I'm so good, see, like look at how good I am, but on the inside it's still sort of that same kind of prejudice showing itself in different ways. So I think it was really fascinating to see that on a screen. And, like the entire time I was watching it, I was also sort of like, I can't believe they let him make this. Like, this is about probably so many of the studio executives who put it out. Not any of the ones I work with, of course, but no, I'm kidding. No, but like, seriously, like it really kind of looks at a type of person that's also like tons of people like that in Hollywood and in New York City and, and like in other places, and it's like amazing that he was able to make the movie as uncompromisingly as he did, but I saw that and was like, it was terrifying to me because, again, minus the sort of sci-fi ending, I'm like, how many of my friends had experiences like this where they went somewhere, and they thought it was going to be fine. And then almost immediately things are not fine, not to go on too much of a tangent, but like, I kind of forgot how quickly the language starts to get suspect once they meet the parents. Like I remember, because this is only the second time I'd seen it after seeing it in theaters. So I remember that obviously things start to get really weird after a little while, but I forgot that like almost from the minute Bradley Whitford meets Daniel Kaluuya, like the language he's using, the descriptors he's using are sort of I kind of wrote down some of them, but like when he starts talking about the deer in the neighborhood, he said like, oh, they're rats destroying our ecosystem. And like, that's clearly like just the same language people use about immigrants and that kind of thing, or non-white folks. And, like that, or saying like, attaboy, or like, just him like bringing souvenirs back from other cultures, as he put it, and just sort of that thing. It was like almost from like the minute you meet them, you're already like, this isn't right. This guy's saying some fucked up stuff. Like he clearly, there's clearly something not right here. And I think that to me was terrifying in a way that felt really real, even if at some point it gets, more science fiction-y. So like that was really kind of my experience with it.
Yeah. The proprietary nature that he has. He's
Damn, I don't know how I followed that up. That was very insightful and
it's
and
real.
Deep and thoughtful. And I just want to make jokes now.
It's it's crazy how it's scary in so many different perspectives. And it's also shame-inducing from so many different perspectives. perspectives.
You know, Chris, that is really.
Yeah, sorry.
I was going to say it's really interesting that you bring up the shame part of like, am I the Lakeith Stanfield character? Because I was so like, or I have been like so defiant in my viewing of this movie, where I'm like, yeah, I'm Chris, and I'm calling Rod, and I'm like, yeah, it seems like all the black people out here missed the movement, never realizing like, wait, I'm low key the guy who missed the movement.
I don't work at the TSA. Fuck.
Yeah, like I kind of am the Lakeith Stanfield character who is like a little too comfortable within, you know, this setting to a point where like it might be creepy for other people who meet me in said setting.
Right. And the wild part is here we are talking about it, and Jordan Peele never said that. You know, he never said that that's what he was getting at. It's just it's evocative. It gets the people going. You know, it really got us talking. And you know how many people mentioned that term sunken place to me after that movie? I feel like people were like, Chris Brown, sunken place. Oh, that's, you know, and
yeah. Good morning to you too.
Right.
How's the coffee?
Right. but you know, it did kind of give you this, like, I'm going to give another look around, a little look-see. And you know, it, you know, and not to get really political with it, but it made you realize what you weren't paying attention to. And that's crazy when a movie can do that. When a movie can go, that, you know, I remember I went to this, and I'm going to make a quick story. I was in Kansas City, and I was doing a gala and to raise money for this play. And I got invited, you know, to do something to raise money, and you know, it was a Native American play, and I was going to like speak about the Native American experience, the little bit that I have, and I was with somebody who was a Native who lived on a reservation, and I didn't have that experience, but we had just seen Get Out like a week before, and then we got brought over to this like big gala event, and they were like highlighting the Native American experience and having us talk about it, and we got into the car after we did like a wine tasting in the basement, literally at the very end when everyone else left. And we looked at each other and we were like, if we never saw Get Out, we would have never thought this. We would have never had this like fear getting back into the car at like 12 o'clock about to drive back. Like, is anybody following us? And it wasn't a legitimate fear, but there was this like, ooh, let's get out of here.
Oh, get out of here.
Oh. Right. And then I would have never had that thought ever.
Well, okay. I think I do want to allow us to put a like positive spin on this conversation that we're having. I think that one of the like amazing things and like what will like obviously be the big lasting legacy of this movie, or at least part of it, is that it really allowed Americans to have more open conversations about things that are very difficult to have conversations about in ways that we weren't as able to before this movie. Right. So like for all of the talks about, you know, like, is racism real, or, you know, whatever, you know, go down the list. I think that this movie really did allow people to think about it and talk about it in ways that were like open and honest. Because it was such like a fresh entry into, and also like being done through genre film, which doesn't make it seem like as serious. Like this isn't 12 Years a Slave, where it's like a historical drama where you have to be like, oh my God, like that's so heavy. Like, I can't believe like people went through that. Like, I don't want to have to, you know, think about that. Or like, you know, Schindler's List, where you're like, oh my God, like I can't believe that that's like a real thing that happened. No, like it's a horror movie, and it allows us to like think about these things in interesting, but also like kind of playful ways. And, you know, we can either talk about this now or later in the episode, but I also feel like this movie then opened the door for a lot of other texts across, you know, all different kinds of media that were like aiming to do similar things. I think so many have fallen short of what it is that this film is able to accomplish, but like that's because this movie is very, you know, like singularly genius in its construction. But I was curious to hear what you guys thought about sort of like how this movie then inspired conversations both in real life and through media.
Let me volley David with this one, because I think David will have a way better breakdown of what I mean by this than I can even speak to. But I think to tag team what you just said, Raph, it's not just to get on a lighter note. It's also, this movie isn't all of the shit that we talk about. It's also just an incredible 3-act structured horror. And that's why we're talking about it. Is the reason why it has all of these, zeitgeist relevant conversations attached to it, is because it wasn't an on the nose soapbox bullshit movie that was trying to talk. Not that 12 Years a Slave is. I'm not that it's just a whole different genre. But to say if it wasn't good, we wouldn't be talking about this. And I think that and I don't know, if I don't mean to commandeer, David, what your response might be, but I think that that's another in terms of the actual structure of the piece, it was a 10 out of 10 regardless of the context.
No, I totally agree. I mean, I was watching it this time, and honestly what I was taken by was just you could, I wouldn't recommend watching this movie, but you could watch this movie completely with blinders on and not think any deeply in anything, and it's still just a really well done horror movie. I mean, it's got a great first scene that's just terrifying. Where Keith Stanfield gets taken to the car, and you're like, what the hell is going on? What is that guy wearing on his head? And you could watch this entire movie, other than what lines they give you about it, really tune all that out, and it would still just be a really effective horror movie. I don't recommend you do that. That's not an endorsement to do that. But yeah. It's really well done. And, kind of what I was saying before is it does what a lot of my favorite horror movies do, which is that it really, through its editing, through certain choices and what it shows and what it doesn't, through camera movement, it really kind of makes everything feel unsettling before any of the really unsettling stuff happens. I thought a lot about, it's a very different movie in a lot of ways, but I thought a lot about The Exorcist, and specifically Bud Smith's editing on The Exorcist. That's really in a lot of ways, that's one of my favorite horror movies, just because if you think about it, the actual full possession of the character doesn't happen until I think over halfway through the film. There's a while that goes where you're just something's wrong with this little girl and you don't really know what, but well before that happens, you're so unnerved by what's going on with the church defacing and her being taken to the hospital and the weird machinery and that kind of thing. And I think Get Out was a lot like that, where it's they kept cutting to these deer heads and these weird looking people, walking around the field, and occasionally you'd see the maid or something kind of run through the back of frame, and you'd be like, what the hell was that? And it's kind of, it hasn't led to the full climax of what this is going to be yet, but you're already kind of terrified. And then once you do reveal it, it just kind of gets to this whole other level of I didn't even know this was where this is going to go. Even knowing that they're unsettling, I didn't know they were capable of this. This is crazy. So it really, I mean, it's such a great slow reveal, where they just squeezes tighter and tighter and tighter until you eventually get to that point. And I just love it for that too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
What is the first big moment that it's not the moment with him it's not the teacup scene, right? It's before that, when he sees the guy running track outside, before the teacup scene. I think that was
just, this is going to be super nerdy, but I'm going to do a full film studies breakdown of a single shot that to me speaks to everything that you guys are talking about with how unsettling the movie is before it actually gets scary. When they first pull up to the house, the car pulls into the driveway, and it's a wide shot of them getting out of the car and greeting the family. And it's this moment of a very familiar and familial kind of love that they are expressing with one another. And they're literally welcoming Chris into their home. But because the whole thing is shot from a wide angle, you never feel that full connection with all the characters, because you don't see them close up, actually hugging and kissing and interacting and stuff.
Right.
And then on top of that, it pulls out to the gardener character just creepily watching them. So within this single shot, you're expressing all of these different things about Chris's psychological state, but also foreshadowing to the creepiness and eeriness of what's going to happen within this house and with this family.
Yeah.
And that's the end of my nerdy rant.
No, because you're so right. Because it could have been a bunch of singles, and they could have zoomed entirely in on their faces and made it creepy because it was just like, you know, all of these face inserts, and that would have done a completely different thing. But this is a, you know, I didn't even think of that when I saw that shot. But that concept of also the event being seen versus us being the viewer, and when we're not the viewer, all of a sudden circumstances change.
Yeah, I mean, again, like it's brilliant filmmaking. It's like insane to think that this was this guy's first movie that he directed.
Yeah.
Because it's working on the social commentary level, it's working on the r/movie details level, but then also like technically, it's doing a lot of really impressive and subtle things, and some like impressive not so subtle things. Like another thing that we haven't talked about is what did you guys make of the costuming at the party where all the white people are wearing like red in some way, and Chris is wearing blue.
Because I want to see that shot again.
Yeah, no, that's actually, I never noticed it that, you're so right. I never noticed it that literally, is that they were all wearing red and he's wearing blue, but that's really interesting. You know, I just took it as like, they're dressed like they might as well be on a plantation in the 1800s, you know, even though it's a Northeast city, you know, in the 2010s. And, I thought that was super deliberate, and how everybody kind of had these like hats, and you know, obviously, you know, like the Keith Stanfield wearing an outfit like that kind of shows he's ingratiated in that crowd more. You know, it's like he has these, you know, I don't know what the name of those hats are, but they look really stupid. But you know, that, and like Stephen Root, I mean, yes, he's blind, but he kind of has this big cane, and like you know, that sort of thing. And meanwhile, Chris is also dressed in a more contemporary fashion, obviously, with just like a button down and a t-shirt and that kind of thing. So I took it more from that angle, as like these are people with very old ideas. But Jordan Peele does use color a lot, and I'm kind of kicking myself for not noticing that. I mean, that's obviously really deliberate in its own way.
The Lakeith Stanfield character, he is wearing like all beige, but he has like a blue rim on his hat.
Right.
But then his wife hands him a red handkerchief at some point to like show that he is like part of their weird sex cult thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. One other thing that I wanted to bring up now that David has brought up the Stephen Root character, but what did you guys make of everything with like eyes and cameras and like that whole element? Was there a lot there for you guys, or do you think that it was just like he just wanted to have Stephen Root play a blind guy?
I feel like, especially in the, you know, the famous shot that Daniel also has centered on his eyes when he is in the sunken place and he has that tear shot. Is that what you mean in terms of eyes, like singles on and inserts on eyes?
Yeah, I just feel like there's a lot with like between like his eyes like being like such a focal part of his performance,
right? And
then also the fact that the character who ends up bidding on Chris's body, which is just like an insane sentence to say out loud.
Yep.
Like wants him for his
sight,
his eye and his sight and his camera. And like, is there something with like oftentimes with movies, we talk about the female gaze. Like, is there something with like a black gaze
damn,
or something that's going on?
Damn. I didn't even think like that. But the fact that there's such variety in what these people want from their sponsor, or I guess they're the sponsor.
Sponsor.
It kind of was because if you're gonna go to the concept of relating this to slavery, so often that was for the body, that was for the individual's strength. And the new age concept of it is, okay, it's not just that anymore. Now it's creative abilities. It's not just that the what's his name used to be a track runner, and he wanted to be in the body of somebody who can run. It's also we want somebody who has a creative eye now. That's what we want from our black folk now. We don't just want their bodies. We want the parts of them that are creative. We see that exists. But they're still property. But we see that there's more than just the physical abilities. In if that answers it in terms of like eye versus muscle,
No, that's amazing. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just saying that's what I took from it too. Like I think it was a lot of to really paraphrase and change a couple select words from something Paul Mooney said on Chappelle's show once. It's like everybody wants to be black, but nobody wants to be black. It's sort of this idea of like,
right.
We love your physical features, and again, going back to Bradley Whitford, kind of bringing him around and talking about his body and how tall he is and how strong he is, and like that kind of thing. It's like you're looking at their body, and again, creative eye too. We see it when people talk about like predominantly black music. We see it with white rappers. We see it with a lot of that kind of thing. It's like there's also this coveting of like this like supposed creative ability, which if you look at it from like a eugenics mindset is like innate. And obviously it's like a deeply racist sort of thinking. That I think Stephen Root's character sort of espouses. So and I really took the eyes in this movie a lot to be sort of like windows into trauma. Obviously, Chris is carrying a lot of trauma regarding, his mom dying, that Captain Keener sort of, like...
I thought you were talking about you for a second.
I did think whenever I kept seeing Chris, I think that was why this movie was so hard to watch. I think partly because his name was Chris was part of it. But keep going, Dave, because you're making a great point. Yeah.
It's like it's eyes into trauma. I think there's also something to be said about whenever they show the deer on the wall, they really kind of show it, like squared on its eyes, its dead eyes, and that kind of thing. So I think it's kind of all the above. It's exactly what Chris was saying. I think it's sort of a comment on like shared experience and lack of shared experience and like holding trauma and how that informs how some of the characters react in this movie. I think it's sort of all the above.
Yeah.
It is, even beyond like not beyond what you're talking about, but you talking about like shared trauma and like exploring all of that stuff. The fact that this movie is able to like layer in that on top of all of the social commentary, on top of being just like a well-crafted horror movie.
Yes.
All within an hour and 45 minutes.
Right.
Is so insane.
Yeah.
Like you talk about movies that like don't have like a wasted breath or like a wasted frame. Like everything is serving some sort of like larger purpose. And it's also a movie like because of everyone's like different experiences, we can come to it and take away like all of these different sort of readings of like what it's about. Like there can be like 50 different explanations for what the sunken place is.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you have one, Chris? Do you want to give us were you going to say something else?
No. I was going to say something else. Keep going.
No, say it.
No, it's I think David brought up The Exorcist, and I think that's one of Jordan Peele's biggest influences. I think he's even said on talk show that Exorcist is his favorite horror movie. It was on Jimmy Fallon. I know exactly when he said it. He actually put Nightmare on Elm Street before it, but that was because it came later and he already put it as second. But anyway, he loved that movie. But I think what you were just saying that made me think of this, Raph, is that it's such a well executed movie, and it's an hour and a half, and it's not complicated. And that's why it didn't get an Oscar, because it's not complicated. It's not involved. It is, but it's so digestible that you walk out of that movie like, wow, that's how it's done. Not like, whoa. Yes, you also like whoa socially, but movie wise, it's not that deep. Like in terms of the structure of what he did, you're right. It was very economic. The movie was very economic.
Yeah.
And, otherwise, and it makes you think, what is an Oscar bid? What makes an Oscar bid?
Yeah.
Because
I would push back a little bit, because I do think that this movie, maybe not like complex or like, it's not like rewriting the language of cinema, but it is very much so very in tune with like what it's doing. I feel like a lot of like,
yes,
I feel like a lot of it is very intentional, but it is also
it's not
digestible.
A slasher film.
Yeah, it's digestible. So like, it's easy to to not like think about like, okay, like what does it mean that this movie takes place in the North? Right. Or like, what does this like particular edit from one shot to another mean? Even though there's probably like some like deep meaning that like 3 people out of the millions who have watched it have picked up on.
Yes.
You know,
you can walk out and just say, wow, that was fucked up. You can't really just walk out of The Exorcist and say, wow, that was fucked up. You're going to say a lot more. Obviously, you'll say a lot more about Get Out too, but movie structure-wise, it's tight.
It's tight.
It's tight.
It's very tight. Gosh, there are so many things to talk about in this movie, but 2 things that I did want to ask about. I think we spoke about it briefly, so we don't have to give too much more thought. But the opening scene, and then I also want to talk to you guys about the last scene because I feel like there's a lot to unpack there. But first, give me your thoughts on the opening scene and like what we're immediately jumping into.
Take it away.
I mean, I think it's a great opening in the sense that like you can, you know, like the rest of the movie, you can kind of watch it one of 2 ways. You know, like if you're watching it without thinking of like the larger racial context or something like that, it's still a little scary to just be in a neighborhood that's unfamiliar and all of a sudden a car's headlights pull up and you don't really know what's going on and it's playing old-timey music, which is such a I don't want to be, but like an easy way to scare, you know, is like you take like a lighthearted old-timey song and play it during a scary moment. That's like easy scares right there. So you know, like I think it really works well on that level of getting you in immediately of like, oh, that was fucking weird, you know, and like I think you see better at the end that he's wearing like kind of a knight's helm, but in the beginning you don't even know what he really has on his head. You just see this gangly guy get out of this car and smack Lakeith Stanfield, and like it's just like you're like, what even was that? Like what did I even see? You know, and obviously then if you add the component of like he's visibly in a suburban neighborhood, he's black, he's on his own, you know, like that's also nerve wracking in its own way. You know, like, even if I don't have that experience, I can see that, you know, and I can tell that's what the film's telling me too. So I think it really works kind of on both those levels and is like a good microcosm for the rest of the film. Like you kind of know what you're getting right away in it, which is great.
And it also feels reminiscent of a movie that you have seen before. And I think that's kind of what is, again, deceptive about this movie, is you think you know what kind of movie this is, where it's blatant, where, you know, where the guy gets, you know, whacked on the side of the road kind of movie. It's like, no. And then it goes straight to a very contemporary couple in a very contemporary liberal world.
Yeah. You know? Chris, when you're saying like it makes you think of other movies, we last week on the show we talked about Halloween, and we were talking in that episode about like how that movie as a horror movie, like it did this interesting thing where it made the suburbs scary, which like previously within the genre had not been a place where like horror had happened to people.
Totally.
So you're watching this and you like, right, like all these movies exist within some sort of like context, and especially within this genre, like you're able to do a lot of interesting things, sort of like building on and playing with both like the history of the genre and just like the contemporary world that the movie takes place in. But yeah, so like then you watch this and you're like, okay, like I know that the suburbs are scary in Halloween, but I'm watching this black guy walk in the suburbs alone, and that's a different kind of scary than Michael Myers coming to slash you.
Yeah.
Like it's the same, but it's also different.
Yeah, because it's like post George Zimmerman. I mean, it's like it's post a world that like that's you know why a man walking through a black man walking through a white neighborhood is not necessarily safe.
Yeah, and we don't even know that it's just the suburbs, so we're like, yeah, it's a white neighborhood.
Yeah. Yikes! Good point. Did I assume? My bad.
Did you assume the gender of those houses?
Yes, I did. And I think there's also like the added fact that, and I think that I don't know if this helped or hurt, but I think there's the added fact that you know a bit about what Jordan Peele is getting at before you go into this movie. Even slightly. I didn't know the full thing, but I mean, the name of it is Get Out. It's about a brother, and I know that there's a white cast. So there's certain things you can kind of just jump in and assume, and he used that to his benefit because we assumed differently than I think he he still duped us, even if we knew what we were going into.
Yeah, absolutely. With the Get Out thing, I'm sure both of you guys are aware of like the like supposed history of Black audience members in horror movies, where we are very quick to yell "Get Out" and not be down with white people doing dumb shit in horror movies that leads them to get killed by a slasher, which is very much so something that he's playing with it in this movie. Okay, so the end. I feel like it's one of the last shots of the movie, but for me is like one of the scariest moments of the film. But I am curious, before I go on another one of my nerdy rants, curious to hear what you guys thought of like how this movie is wrapped up.
I not to feel like I was like so ahead of it and I knew what was going to happen or whatever, but like as we get through that point where he gets out, I'm going like the one loose end here is that cop at the beginning of the movie. Like we have not seen like kind of what happens with that cop. Is he going to come back? Is he going to do anything? And I'm thinking like he just ran out of this house. There's a pile of like dead white people behind him. You know, he's in the middle of the road, and I'm thinking like he's so screwed. And then like right as I thought that, the lights came on, and it was like, oh, like my stomach dropped. You know, like it was just this feeling of like, oh god, like that's how this is going to end. You know, like he's just fucked no matter what. Like there's no way he'd be able to explain this, and even if he could, everybody's probably in on it. I thought it was an unbelievable moment when Lil Rel gets out of the car. It was a huge audience reaction when I saw it, which was such a great feeling of like shared catharsis. And it's like, on the one hand, it's like I feel like he's fucked no matter what, right? Like I mean, like I don't know, like he's definitely got to like go and change his name and move. But at the same time, like I believe Jordan Peele had said he either filmed the ending or like was thinking about ending it kind of more the way I described, like the cop gets out of the car and he arrests him, and just decided like, no, that movie does need that moment of levity at the end. And like even if it doesn't quite have the same like chokehold point to it, I think it really works as kind of a collective release from the audience. You know, it's like, and like Lil Rel is so great throughout that entire movie. You know, so to watch him pay off there is just incredible. But the one thing I always wondered from watching it was is Rose dead? Like you're never really certain if Rose died there because he couldn't do it.
Too. Yeah. Rose's revenge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm surprised it has. I'm sure some exec has pitched that. Like,
oh yeah,
they have to have.
It would be terrible, but I would be down with it. I would be down with like a drop off in quality sequel to Get Out, where Rose returns to like hunt down Chris.
It would be very traditional horror if they did that.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. I think what made that moment so fucked was you immediately leave like, what's scarier? The sci-fi aspect of getting your soul fucking sucked out of you by your girlfriend's parents, or trying to explain that to a cop on the side of a road. What's fucking scarier? You know, and it's and all of a sudden this horrible sci-fi fear becomes this very grounded real life fear. And it puts you in this perspective of like, and I don't think he was even trying to be on the nose about this, but the idea of, I am believed as well as a black person in America, you are believed as well as Daniel Kaluuya would be believed, or would, you know, in this circumstance. That is as far as your alibi is going to get you in reality as well, as far as this bullshit sci-fi concept that he's going to drop onto this cop to try to explain why he's, you know, bloody and yeah,
there's a house full of dead white people,
and his girlfriend's on the floor. Like, you go, wow, yeah, the reality of like explaining that one is actually tough, but it made you think as a viewer, there are so many circumstances that aren't hard to explain, but are still going to be just as hard to explain to a white cop as a black person.
Yeah,
not to always go back to that, but it's like, I think the switch from sci-fi fear to like real grounded fear is really abrupt.
Mm-hmm. I think you guys both hit what I believe to be the nail on the head in terms of like what makes that ending so like insanely powerful is the single scariest shot in the movie is seeing red and blue lights flash on Daniel Kaluuya's face.
Because everyone just goes, "Oh shit,"
which is so fucked that
Yeah.
we all as audience members know, based on like our shared history, what those lights on that face with all of the circumstances. We just saw him get out of like the most, harrowing situation. And in a movie, like we should, or in real life, when that happens, you should think like, oh, the cops are here. Thank God. And everyone in the theater thinks, oh, the cops are here. He's screwed.
Yep.
And Jordan Peele doesn't have to. He explains all of that with just the lights on his face. And we're all like, this dude's fucked.
Yep.
He's fucked.
Yep. And every other horror movie, when the cops come, it's the happy ending. I can assume the rest.
Yeah,
I can leave when the cops are coming. I can get out of here before traffic gets bad. Right? Yeah. I know the movie's over. And it's the exact opposite. That's a great point, Raph. It's the exact
but that's opposite. The point. That's the point that you guys are like both made. Like, right? Like, David, you're like, oh my God, the cop from the beginning is going to show up and he's going to arrest him. And Chris, you're like, what's scarier? The like, heady sci-fi horror concept of like these like weirdo like lobotomy surgeries that they're doing, or a cop showing up to arrest a black guy who's like innocent in this situation,
trying to explain that.
Yeah, like which one's scarier? And so I think we're all kind of speaking the same language, which like, again, like he's playing with a shared knowledge that like we all have. And if you watch that movie, like I don't think that anyone is actually watching this movie and they see those lights on his face and they're like, oh, thank God he's saved.
Yeah.
And if you are saying that, I think you're lying to yourself a little bit. And like not to be on my, on my soapbox or whatever, but I truly think if you're watching this movie for the first time and you see that moment and you're not thinking he's screwed, there's like maybe a little bit more soul searching that you need to do.
Or digging. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it ends up being Rod and we're all good. And now we can get out too. I have the DVD and one of the extra features is the alternate ending. And I watched it for the first time the other day where it is the cops show up, they arrest him. And then the last scene is him in jail and Rod comes to visit and Chris is just like, it's fine. They're dead. So I took care of it. And it like ends with him like walking off to his jail cell. And I got to tell you, nowhere near as satisfying as the ending that we have. Like we needed that ending. Like you were saying, David, where we need that catharsis as like audience members.
Yeah. Just, I've never actually seen, I know that they were supposed to do that, but I've never actually seen it. Is it that same cop from the beginning or is it just like kind of faceless cops that come?
I think it's just like faceless cops.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds the point just the same.
Yeah. It would have made sense if it was the same cop. Maybe it was, and I just didn't pick it up.
Maybe he's doing other stuff.
Yeah. It's hard to, and I what that does, I think, for a viewer is it gives this feeling of like, well, one, so many horror movies, and nowadays not so much, but do end in a happy ending that it's like, well, this one deserves it too. But, or at least not a horrible ending for the protagonist. But it's also just that I think like, I don't think we'd be talking about it as much if he did go to jail. Mm-hmm. Because I feel like it would just be like, yeah, another one. Not really. I do think we would still talk about it in some capacity. But I think because we walked out going, fucking TSA is what made this movie so good. Because again, the TSA is also a uniquely black experience. You know what I mean? And it's the case. And it's not a coincidence that he made that character a black guy that works at the TSA. Mm-hmm. and I think it again, in terms of fucking with us, it was the last moment Jordan Peele could be like, gotcha again. We expected so much going into this movie, Way more than I expected going into Shape of Water. You know what I mean? I had nothing going into that.
What a random pull.
Well, I'm just saying, I expected so much, and it was the last moment Jordan could be like, "Gotcha again, y'all." You know, which I.
It is interesting that you bring up TSA and like how like that job like is sort of like there is like a racial element, or not racial element, but you guys know what I mean.
A lot of black folks that work for the TSA.
Yeah. But then that also makes me think of what did you guys make of the scene with where he goes to the detectives? Because it is played for laughs, but like it is also like, oh, okay, whatever. Like this black guy's missing, or these two black guys are missing. Like they'll find their way back.
Yeah, like this idea that once you're like ingrained in the system, it kind of does, like you sort of fall into the same racist establishment, even if you are black. I think it's sort of like a more subtle version of Lakeith Stanfield and the guys who get turned. Like it's just sort of like they're part of the same wall as everybody else now.
Yeah. Super interesting.
That it's not this perfect ending. Yeah.
Yeah, because like, right, like there is a version of this movie where he goes to them and they like go and and like the cops are like, okay, we're gonna storm the house or whatever, and we're gonna get Chris back. But Jordan Peele knows like that doesn't really jive with like the experience that people have had for so long in this country, and like it wouldn't make sense for the movie or for like the real life experiences of a character or people who have the same experiences as the Chris character.
Yeah. I mean, there's something super unsettling about it, because like even if you have no idea what's going on in the rest of the movie and you just hear this guy say like they're turning people's minds out, or whatever, like that sounds harebrained. But at the end of it, he's still like, there's a missing person. I have a picture of him. He's right here. Like this is proof that this missing person is here. And they're just like, whatever. Like that's like super dark. Even if like the scene's played for laughs, which again, just goes back to why it's so effective.
Yeah. Because there also is like the way that Lil Ray says abducted is hilarious.
He's so good in this entire movie. We haven't talked about him that much, but he's just like, he was so perfectly cast again, and like it's just such a great counterpoint to everything that's happening. Mm-hmm. I really noticed that, especially this time. It's just like how much I was loving every time he was on camera or on the phone, just being like, one quarter of the time is just when Chris is kind of telling him some of the stuff, and he goes, "Oh, that's Jeffrey Dahmer business right there." I really just like big ups to him. He's really funny, especially in this movie.
And longevity wise, like it's really, it's a good movie when an actor like that becomes typecast as that type of character for the next 5 years after that movie. Mm-hmm. And now he plays that type of role almost consistently in comedies.
Yeah.
And it's very much ingrained in that experience in that movie.
Yeah. I think
whether or not he wants that, I don't know, but it didn't.
I think he's great in this movie. I don't find him to be that funny elsewhere, and I think part of that is just like Jordan Peele is such a good writer. Like I was thinking this time around, like, oh, like that could have just been Jordan Peele who like played that role himself.
Yeah. I agree. I don't love, and not to say I don't think he's a bad actor. I think he's very funny, but I think that movie gave such a great idea of who he is, and I think this is a testament to good writing. It's like when you read a good script, you go, "Oh, I know exactly who he is." So kudos to the actor for going, "I'm going to nail that perfectly." Like that's still on him for doing that. But you're right; it's so clear in who you are for Chris's character. It's so clearly established what you provide the viewer of this movie and the protagonist of this movie. And that's why he gets typecasted like that.
They abducting black people. And turn them into sex slaves and shit. Sorry.
Him just being right about that was so, I mean, like, it was horrifying, but it was also just so funny that he actually, like, really kind of called that.
He nailed it.
Yeah, that's literally exactly what they were doing.
Yeah.
Brainwashing them.
It does cut to him, right? It cuts to him midway, right? Like, doesn't he have a moment halfway through the movie where he is that the scene with the two detectives, or is that the very end?
That's towards the end with the detectives.
The end. Yeah.
Wow. Was there? I feel like there's so much more stuff that we can talk about. I think I've exhausted all of my notes, but do you guys have anything else that you wanted to bring up about this movie?
I think it's like it's because of a lot of what we talked about, how it's so many things, but also how easily digestible it is and how thought provoking it is. Like, it's hard to think of a larger movie in terms of like a film that's like permeated into our culture the way Get Out has, at least in the last, like 15, 20 years or so. Just the different ways it's sort of in the cultural lexicon now, obviously just as a very good movie, but also, like just different aspects about the concept of the sunken place, the fact that that gets brought up just in separate conversation now, or like the Keith Stanfield in the hat is kind of a meme that gets used sometimes, or just different things like that, or even honestly, the trope of like I voted for Obama, I would have voted for him a third time if I could, is also like something that I think sort of exists outside of that movie now, because like to refer to a certain type of person because of this movie, it's like there's you can go back to any decade or any time and kind of think of a movie that really sort of like captured the cultural language, and sort of influenced it. And I think like Get Out's probably the biggest one that I can think of most recently. And I think there's really something to be said about that.
Absolutely. And there's totally a post Get Out, like, I think we spoke about it a little bit, but there's like a post Get Out, like movie world where people have been trying to recapture that magic. But like, honestly, it's like kind of similar. It's like The Matrix, where it's like this movie just like totally came and just like, it came out at the perfect time, was really a great reflection of like what we were experiencing as a culture, and was able to provoke us and entertain us at the same time in like ways that have had insane lasting effects.
Yeah.
That's a really good comparison, actually. Yeah, because The Matrix is also, it's like, on the forefront, it's this awesome like kung fu action movie, but then there's all this stuff running underneath it that's like a total mirror to our society at that point. So yeah, I mean, that's another one of those movies for sure.
Yeah, in terms of permeating, like having conversation about like you need to take the red pill kind of thing, or you're in the sunken place kind of. Yeah, where quotes become separated from the movie itself.
Yeah,
that's
very much so. I was just gonna say this was very much so a movie. Like, I think one of the few times that I've experienced this in like my adult film going, where I walked out of the theater and like everyone in the lobby is like talking about the movie and like nonstop, just like, what did you think? Like, what do you think that this means? Like all this stuff. Which it goes, David, to what you're saying about like, we haven't really had something that has permeated the culture like this in quite a while. Like, this is very much so, I think, like the definitive movie of its time. And I think with time, that will only become, more and more true. Yeah.
And I think
also like, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
You go
no, you go ahead, David, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, the existence of it also is kind of in its own way, like watching how people reacted to it, how it's sort of this like completely out of nowhere thing, but it did sort of get into the awards circle a bit and it won best screenplay. But, I think a really interesting way to look at our history is like, in terms of film is like this won best original screenplay. And then the year after, Green Book won best original screenplay. So kind of the sort of.
It won? I didn't know that. Oh,
shit.
Get Out
did. Yeah, Get Out won Best Original Screenplay. It was up for Best Picture, but it lost to, actually, funny, I think it lost to Shape of Water, actually, so it's really funny. But I could be, I'm pretty sure that's how it went.
I didn't know it won an Oscar, so I was wrong about that. I'm sorry.
I believe that's the only one it won, was Best
Original
Screenplay.
One.
And then it kind of rubber banded back in a movie like Green Book won after that. And I feel like Get Out is also sort of this, like, it's a really important film, but it's also like it almost became the Obama voted meme itself. Whereas like white people would be like, "Oh, I loved Get Out; it was great," and then like kind of the year after, be like, "Well, we gave Get Out its Oscar, so we don't need a movie like that again for a while." It's like it really like its own existence became like kind of a cultural touch point. In a way that that Jordan Peele maybe planned on, but like even like I don't think anybody imagined like how big it was going to get.
Yeah. Damn, it's like, yeah, we gave it a chance. We did it. We did that.
It became the meme from the movie.
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah, that's accurate. I also think that like kudos to Blumhouse and Monkey Paw, because I think another big part of why it was such a success is not just because of the creative individual who made it, Jordan Peele, good on you, killed it. But also the opportunity it had and the space it was able to take up is not a readily available space. So to make the space to make the movie is also why it was so good. Because I think we don't need necessarily more genius minds like Jordan Peele in order to have great movies. We just need to have space for thinking minds to be able to make movies. And I think there's this and this is something I wanted to speak to before we ended, was there's this idolization of certain thinkers. And I think we're so good at idolizing thinkers and creatives that have done it. And we're not so good at going, oh, but it's actually the space that they were allowed in order to go and do that thing and use their brain and use that creative energy. So, and again, not to push things, but it's like Jordan Peele couldn't exist if there weren't spaces for that to happen. And we're so good at being like, wow, what a good job. And not so good at being like, what are the production houses that, you know, that allow this sort of, and it's his production house. So there's that, but that make the space for this, you know, so that there can be more.
Mm-hmm. And it's also like with that, and I don't want to get on my soapbox too much here, because I'm sure people have heard me say it in past episodes, but like, you know, like we should allow that space for people, and like sometimes like it won't work out, you know, like you're not always going to get the next Jordan Peele. Like he is now someone who in Hollywood, like if he like comes to you with an idea, you're like, yeah, have all the money, do whatever the hell you want. Like we know that you're going to make something cool, and interesting. And like Greta Gerwig, you know, like she is now someone who she was given that space to make Lady Bird. And now we're all like, yeah, do whatever the hell you want to make.
Right.
And for every Greta Gerwig and Jordan Peele, there will be a few people who will try to make stuff and it won't, you know, they won't be masterpieces the way that those two people are able to make masterpieces. And that's fine. That's fine. But like allow them to have the space to make it. But then also if you're the creative or director or whatever, like don't just try to replicate Get Out, because like a lot of times like you won't be able to. And then we get those movies that are like very soapboxy, like about their social issues and commentary, that it's then like, okay, well you're like now like you're like undoing everything that Get Out like, you know, broke through and was able to do.
What Get Out will do is it'll create a 10-year copycat period until they create a new movie that then breaks away from molds and then gets copycatted. And Get Out's not the only one that does that, but that's this. And I think I'm really glad that you brought Dave and I, because I think being in the industry, that's one of the things you do realize is that there is a lot of like obsession about the thing that hit. And not the realization of why it hit. Mm-hmm. You know, I think that's one of the hard things about the industry is like, what's the reason it did so well? Mm-hmm. And you know, and then mining that. Yeah.
I keep thinking of I think Cord Jefferson, the guy who wrote and directed American Fiction, when he won the Oscar, I think also for screenplay this past year, I think adapted maybe this time, but he said like you can make a $200 million movie, or you can make 4 $50 million movies, or you can make 8 $25 million movies. And it's like, you know, like leave room for kind of more of those kinds of films. And, you know, like you'll get, it wasn't just like it's a good thing morally, but it's also like you'll find a lot of success. You know, I mean, I think American Fiction was also one that like kind of came from nowhere and did really well on not a huge budget, you know. So I think it was a good takeaway, which I hope people will one day listen to. I don't know if they are yet, but maybe
we'll get there. Yeah. I could go on and rant about that for ages, but I don't think anyone wants to hear that. But what people do want to hear is they want to hear us rant about some recommendations that we have for Get Out. So, I feel like we've talked about, you know, there's so much with this movie. This has been an absolutely amazing conversation. So thank you both again for joining and sharing all of your thoughts and insights and making this a really engaging and smart and like elevating the conversation in ways that, I wouldn't have been able to if I were doing this solo. So with all that, we can do some recommendations for this movie. Just in case we have any new listeners, I'll quickly run through the rules for recommendations. But for each movie that we introduce into the canon, we also recommend 3 things per guest host of other things to check out if you like said movie. Of those 3 things, at least one has to be another movie. The other 2 can be any and everything else. It could be more movies, it could be a TV show, an episode of TV, a book, a comic book, a video game, an album, really, really anything. The connections can be as loose or on the nose as we like. And for any movies that we recommend, can't be other movies within the canon. So those are the rules. What do you guys say? Chris looks like he's not ready. Chris looks like he doesn't have any recommendations.
I got two.
Okay. 2 works. I can give you a third one. I got a lot of leftovers. So let's go for the order. David, you'll give your first, and then Chris, and then Raph, and then we'll go round robin.
All right. So I'd say my first recommendation is probably the one closest to this film is it's a YouTube video of a performance of a song called Urban Legend. So Urban Legend is written by Michael Abels. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, but it might be Abels. But he is the composer for Get Out and actually all of Jordan Peele's films. And so he's definitely got like a classical music background, and it's really informed in his scoring. But Urban Legend is sort of a standalone piece that he did with the Harlem Quartet and the Sphinx Symphony. So it's this really interesting sort of like kind of modern classical movement, like multi-movement song. It's only 10 minutes long, but it goes into a lot of places in 10 minutes. And like a lot of the strings are really discordant and arrhythmic, but then it'll kind of like slip into kind of more of a rhythmic part and then go right out of it. And it really kind of moves up and down in a lot of interesting ways. And if you like his scoring in these movies, I think that's a good thing to check out. I believe the song literally does show up in Nope at some point. I have to check it out, but I read that while I was looking into it. But also good to YouTube this because it's said that Jordan Peele saw this YouTube video and that's what got him to hire Michael Abels. So and you can see why when you listen to it. It's so well done and so like well thought out, but also deeply unusual as far as a classical performance. And it's cool that it's the Harlem Quartet and the Sphinx Symphony. Obviously, classical orchestral spaces are often still really white spaces, so it's really cool to see a predominantly non-white orchestra perform this stuff. And it's super well done. It's from it's from 2011 or 2012, but I highly recommend it. It's only 10 minutes, so I highly recommend checking that out.
I'm typing that in.
If you listen to this episode and you want to hear something cool.
Yeah, I have to check that out now.
That sounds very dope. I like it. Starting us off hot.
Yeah, that's a hot take.
Hot.
I've got a fun one, I think.
Yeah.
So mine is a movie from 2005 starring Kate Hudson called Skeleton Key. So definitely ditches the whole racial aspect of everything. But in terms of the feeling this movie gave me in terms of fucking with me, it's a similar. The reason why I like it is because it is a seemingly stupid slasher film that you think is this dumb. Kate Hudson moves into this house and she's a caretaker for this family, and it's a horror movie, but you're expecting it to be this typical psychological whatever slasher, and it actually is one of the weirder movies I've ever seen. Not necessarily incredible, certainly wasn't as well received as Get Out, but it fucked with me, and Get Out fucked with me. So it's a similar a movie can really bring you in one direction and completely spit you out with different thought process. So that's why I'm trying to. Yeah, I'm trying to see who the director was. Ian Softly. It's a $43 million with his work. Yeah, it's a $43 million budget movie, but it's it's simple. Again, hour and a half, simple, fucks with you.
I dig
movie.
it.
Yeah,
I like it. I've not seen Skeleton Key, but
I saw
it feels very 2005.
Yeah.
It's really funny you were talking about taking dates to get out and stuff because because this wasn't me, but a friend of mine who will remain nameless on recording, but I can tell you it off camera. But
Yeah.
but I don't, because we were like, I think like 12, 13 when that movie came out, so it was right when like people were starting to date people and like stuff like
Yeah.
that. So a friend of mine, at the behest of his then like 8th grade girlfriend, they were both in 8th grade. Let me be very clear.
Yeah, of course.
At the behest of his like, you know, like first girlfriend at that point, like went to see Skeleton Key, and you know, like at that age, it's like you're just hoping to like make out and stuff like that. And you know, like I remember him calling me after, he's like, "Man, like I was hoping to go well, it was like a movie date and all that, but then we saw Skeleton Key, and it's like the vibes are off, and like it's like every time I hear Skeleton Key, I just think of that story."
Yeah, I wouldn't take a date.
No,
unless you know him well. Unless you know.
That's amazing. That's not an 8th grade, you know, second date where you're just trying to make out in the back of the theater kind of movie. That's so funny. Oh man, that's great.
That's fucked.
A nice like sort of bonus rec. Just a great side story. Okay, for my first recommendation, I'm going to go with a pretty obvious choice, but we were talking about how Gambino's Redbone is used in this, and this was also around the time that Gambino was like breaking out into becoming like one of the more interesting artists that we just like had going in America. So like coming off of like the like punchliney rap of like Freaks and Geeks and Bonfire and stuff, and moving into like interesting R&B spaces with Redbone, not the 8 hours of uninterrupted NFL football. Yeah.
I'd recommend that.
Yeah. But he was also around the same time giving us Atlanta, which in my estimation is one of the best TV shows of all time. But I'm just going to recommend a single episode that I feel like mirrors this movie very well. It's season 1. I think it's episode 9, but it's the Juneteenth episode.
Yeah.
Where there's a white character in that who very much so could be of the family within Get Out.
Of the ilk.
Same ilk for sure. And Gambino's character in Atlanta has like a similar experience to Chris within Get Out in that episode. It's one of the funnier episodes of that show.
Also a great show for speaking to the African American experience too.
Yeah, and also Lakeith Stanfield, right?
Also Lakeith Stanfield.
Yeah, who's actually, I don't think he's in this episode, but that's okay.
Yeah. I also kept thinking of it came after Get Out, but the Teddy Perkins episode also, like, I think totally there's some shared DNA there for a lot of people, including
Chris and I were talking about Teddy Perkins like a week ago.
Oh yeah.
But I was also thinking about that episode while watching this.
I am a 34-year-old.
Juneteenth episode was great though, and like talked way less about than Teddy Perkins, so that's a good rec.
Yeah.
All right, Sweet Dave, back to you.
Oh, cool. This one felt a little on the nose, but it actually was really worthwhile when I ended up doing it. I for the first time watched the original Candyman this week related to this. You know, I didn't realize that he literally wrote the sequel that came out. Jordan Peele literally wrote the sequel that came out a couple years ago. But I thought anyway, Candyman would be kind of a good choice because I've heard it pointed to as sort of like an earlier horror movie that's also deals with you know, like the being Black in America as an experience, and it really does do that quite well. Especially for a movie from 1992, it's a good traditionally scary slasher, and Tony Todd is like terrifying in it, and like, you know, I mean, it just borders on being campy, but it works just well enough that you're kind of with it. But it's also like, it really is a movie about you know, like the trauma that is often inherent with growing up like poor and Black, especially in Chicago, and, you know, sort of white indifference to that suffering, and like white tourism and that suffering and that kind of thing. And like, you know, it really juggles a lot for a movie that's also about a guy with a hook for a hand who kills people. So like, it was a super rewarding, and again, like an hour 45, you know, and like so much to unpack in it. And it's really well done. And it's based on a Clive Barker short story. And Clive Barker did like Hellraiser and like Books of Blood and like all these other great horror movies. But like, Clive Barker's a white British man, so like I think his version was sort of like a working class British guy And so
Mhm.
it was Bernard Rose, the guy who directed and wrote this, who's just like a white Jewish guy. Like you would, I I guess shouts out to him for like considering this sort of perspective. But like he's the one who kind of rewrote it as being on like in the projects in Chicago and that kind of thing. And I think it really like it's the kind of thing that could have failed miserably. And certainly like some elements of it are a little dated, but it's like it
Yeah.
surprisingly holds up for that. I thought it was a really well done movie.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah,
I've not seen the OG Candyman.
I haven't either. I only saw the new one.
Yeah.
Is the new one good? I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
It was solid. Yeah.
It's a remake, but I guess it's like a sequel sort of to this one.
Yeah, it's kind of a sequel. Yam is dope.
Yes.
He's a great actor and like should be in everything.
Yes.
It definitely falls into like this is like a post Get Out movie.
Yeah.
Which at times is kind of annoying, but there is a lot of cool stuff to it. And like the director, I think it was her first like major film. And she has promise. She obviously like didn't come out of the gates the way that Jordan Peele did, but like she can make like down the line, like she'll make something that's like amazing.
Yeah.
It's Nia DaCosta, who I worked on The Marvels, which was her, which she directed. I can't, and this is no disrespect to Nia DaCosta, it's just like where I was, like I didn't get to work with her very closely, but I did think it was neat to kind of have that shared thing a little bit.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's dope.
Yeah,
Good,
I think that's
pick.
a perfect pick. Yeah, I don't think there is a better pick in terms of like that same-ish associative feeling where black people in horror films is something very rare unless there's somebody being killed in a horror film, and so it's like a second film where it's like, oh, actually, this person is doing the killing in this case.
Yeah.
So it's like it's a very different. It surprises you in that way. I like that choice. My second one is another Jordan Peele original, not original, I guess, but adaptation. It's not the entire series that is Twilight Zone series, but the second episode, which is starring. Hold on, give me. It's about, you guys might remember who it's starring. It's about comedians. Did you see that Twilight Zone?
I've heard it's really good. I haven't caught it yet.
Yes, yeah, it's awesome. It's with I'm gonna butcher his name, Kumail Ali Najani. But he plays this comedian who has to decide to make a choice that is given to him by Tracy Morgan, who plays this like old veteran comedian. The reason why I bring it up is it's another Jordan Peele piece, but it's also the same concept of a commentary on society and then how sci-fi can blow that up and make a choice that somebody could make in the real world, something that has an outcome that is supernatural, that's related to the outcome that would be comedians' depressions. Or depression among comedians and the loneliness that comedians have. But it makes that sci-fi. And so that's why I think it relates in a way.
I like it. I dig it. I've heard mixed things about the Twilight Zone.
Not amazing.
But I've heard that episode in particular is really good.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
got to check that out.
Yeah.
That's dope. For my second pick, I'm going to go down a similar path to Dave, but I'm going to go with a film that it's not explicitly a horror movie, but to me, I think can be classified as one. I'm going to go with Juice from, I'm forgetting what year in the 90s, and I'm pretty sure the director's name is Eric Dickerson. He was the cinematographer on Do the Right Thing and then like went on to make a few indie movies. And you could tell that like from his movies that he always had like horror sensibilities, but because Hollywood in the 90s was more racist than it is now, like he never like really got the opportunity to make as many movies as he should have been given. Like you can tell that this guy, for lack of a better phrase, has the juice as a director. But nice. Juice is very much so. It's like more of like, it's probably more seen as like a classic like teen drama about growing up in the hood. But to me, it's very much so a like slasher horror flick about growing up in the hood. Tupac is amazing, like absolutely incredible in it, like one of the best performances you'll like ever see from an actor. Wow, absolutely, damn. Like great movie, but also about like the horrors of the, Black American experience. So that's what I'm going with for my second pick.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. I haven't actually seen Juice, but I know Tupac's a really good actor. I saw, there's that movie Gridlocked, which is him and Tim Roth, and I think may have come out posthumously. I forget, but he's great in that. I mean, like with all the other what ifs of Tupac, like I always consider the fact that like he probably would have had a really rich film career along with everything else, just because he's a great actor, as well as being a great rapper.
People forget that he was like a classically trained like theater actor in high school.
100%.
Really? I never knew that. Wow.
Yeah, he's like the son of these like really well respected like Black activists from like the 70s, and like had this like not bougie but like kind of like nice upbringing in Maryland, and went to like the Baltimore School of the Arts, which is like one of the best art schools in the country. And like he was like this amazingly talented actor, and then he was like, fuck it, I'm just gonna be a rapper from Oakland. It's like
great acting.
Yeah.
I have heard that
performance was as like Tupac the rapper.
Right.
That's a discussion for another day, but
yeah.
There we go. Sweet. So on to number 3 for everyone.
So I kind of keep a list, like a notes app list on my phone of like movies, especially more modern movies, the last like 20 years or so that people keep telling me to watch that I haven't gotten around to yet, or I keep hearing good things about. And I was really excited because like this afforded me the opportunity. I mean, I could watch these movies at any point, but like this really gave me a good reason to watch one of the movies on that list. So I watched via the Daniel Kaluuya connection. I watched Widows from 2018, which is Steve McQueen, the guy who directed, not Steve McQueen, the actor from the 70s and 60s, but Steve McQueen, the director of 12 Years a Slave and Shame and a couple other things, did this one, and it's a banger of a movie. It's not a horror film, or although it does deal with some kind of real life fears the same way Get Out does, but it's about these women who are married or involved with these men who were part of like a crime group, basically bank robbers, like they're robbers and they get killed in action, and they have to then kind of stage a heist to sort of overcome, the mess that was left in the wake of their deaths. And Viola Davis stars in it, but just to kind of speak to the Get Out connection, like Daniel Kaluuya is really unbelievable in this movie because he plays a very bad guy. He's very terrifying and like coldly, intense and scary in a way that's very different from a lot of the other stuff I've seen him in, but at the same time is informed by like kind of his same skills as an actor. And, it's really great because in the first scene you see him and you kind of don't know he's that type of guy. You just kind of sort of see him in passing. And then kind of when it's revealed that he actually is this really, he kind of does this really like shocking act of violence in one of the early scenes of the movie. And it's really jarring and it's sold really well by him. And, kind of throughout the movie, he's really like this very like scary presence, in a way that I think is super effective. And it's just a great movie. It's a good heist movie. It's a good, a lot of great acting, a lot of great writing, and also just like a litany of like famous people who you didn't know were in this movie, like Colin Farrell and Robert Duvall and Viola Davis, obviously Liam Neeson. Like all these people show up throughout this movie, and it's like there's a twist every couple minutes basically where it's like you didn't know something was the way it was, and then all of a sudden it gets revealed like all the way through to the end of the movie. It's really it's a lot of fun watching, even though it's also pretty heavy.
Could you say the name of that one again?
Widows,
yeah. Okay.
I've heard that movie's dope.
Yeah, I gotta see that.
I have not gotten around to it. I forgot it was Steve McQueen. Steve McQueen is amazing.
Yeah, agreed.
Like one of the best filmmakers we have going right now.
Yeah, somehow like quietly, like underrated.
Yeah,
he has gotten Oscar love, obviously.
I think the movie that's coming out this year from him, Blitz, with Saoirse Ronan, like that might, that will probably get him to like become a household name. People will be like, "Oh yeah, this guy is incredible."
Yeah. And you're right. It's not household. It's household among people who really know movies, I guess. But you're right. It's not like you're right. It's not like Greta Gerwig, I guess, at this point.
Yeah.
He'll
get
even Greta Gerwig's like, yeah.
I was he's like, fuck that actor. Like, I'm not going to be Stephen McQueen. Like,
right.
Fuck you.
I should have done the same fucking thing.
Yeah, there you go. Just reclaim it.
Yeah, that's I'm gonna see that movie because I've heard things about that, and now that it's getting a recommendation, I'm like, I gotta check this out. Yeah.
You got to peep.
I got.
Did you think of a third one?
Yes, I did. So my obvious, so I was gonna pick Nope because it's obviously also Jordan Peele and it's a great movie and it's another movie that really surprises you in terms of how they commodify fear literally in the movie. But I decided not to do that. I decided to go with the Lakeith Stanfield pick, the movie Death Note. I don't know if you guys have seen Death Note. It's not like Get Out at all, but it's another movie that it's with Willem Dafoe and Lakeith Stanfield. And the main character. Yeah, no, it's great. It's based off of a comic book, but this kid gets this book that he finds that he can write a name in and kill the person that he wrote their name, and it gets out of hand.
That's where I've heard of it. Yeah. Sorry to cut you off. Yeah.
No. Yeah, and it's a very different type of horror in that it's psychological, but it's also got creatures in it, and so it's a very different type of horror. Lakeith Stanfield plays a detective trying to catch the kid who is killing all these people. And I thought it was a weird movie. I don't think I thought it was a 10 out of 10 movie. The reason why I bring it up is because it's another movie that, as an African-American, actor, I remember looking at Lakeith Stanfield and be like, I don't feel like that's who I would have brought in to cast as a detective here. And then I realized I'm fucked for that. And so it made me realize, like, it put black bodies in different spaces in horror films, which is this is why I bring this one up, where he plays this detective, this young detective, and it just kind of shook the genre a little bit for me, and I was like, oh wow, this is a different way, and Willem Dafoe is really good as this devil creature, very very interesting,
very fitting for him.
Yes,
yeah, I know the anime. I haven't seen the movie, but
it's also an anime.
The source material is awesome.
Right. Yeah,
that's sweet. That's a good pick.
Not the best movie. It's not a 10 out of 10, but neither was Skeleton.
But still, still worthwhile to check out. For all the reasons that you're saying.
Yeah.
I feel like his career has been super interesting, and he always chooses like really cool roles. I also met him at a bar in LA once.
Really?
Yeah.
That's cool. I haven't met him at a bar in LA.
Yeah, right.
And you live there. Yeah, I met him at a bar in LA a few hours after sitting at dinner a table over from Tyler, the Creator.
Oh wow.
Damn.
That's crazy.
Yeah. It's pretty
How?
Just
LA.
I was at a restaurant. Just LA, yeah.
And LA, baby.
Tyler was at dinner, and then I was at a bar, and Lakeith Stanfield was like there with his boys.
That's cool.
Dapped him up and everything. Yeah. Oh, nice. I was like, dude, you're dope in, Atlanta and Get Out, and Sorry to Bother You and everything else that you're in.
He was probably like, name them.
Note. Yeah.
I agree with you. I think he is one of those guys who is very particular about what he does. Mm-hmm. He's very, very particular about what he chooses to do. And that's respect.
He chooses really cool roles. You can tell he has like.
I was just saying, great in Judas and the Black Messiah, which we talked about earlier with regard to Dan Kaluuya.
Yeah, another great movie.
Great movie. Okay, guys, for my last recommendation, I'm going to do something really cringeworthy, but like I'm just going to do it because we're here and it's the last recommendation of the episode. And like I'm like conflicted about recommending it, but I'm going to recommend a book, and I just like have to recommend it because we're here. Even though I don't really want to recommend it, and we can there can be all of the discourse around this book and whether or not it's actually a worthwhile read and all the rest. I'm recommending White Fragility. Just, I get it. It's controversial, but read the book and then, gather your thoughts from there, whether you find it to actually be helpful or detrimental or whatever it may be. I get it, but like most Americans should probably read it just to engage some sort of like sense of race and our relationship to race as a country and society and all that stuff. Maybe not as fun or all that stuff as Get Out, but it's just read it. Just go read the book.
All right.
I haven't actually read it. I'm just like, I mostly just know about like the arguments people have related to it about whether it's like an essential text or like something you should really ignore. And like, I've never actually like looked into the source of it to see what it's all about. But I mean, it is like a very significant book in the way that Get Out's a really significant movie, and that it just sort of like dominated the airspace when it came out. And as far as these types of discussions, for very different reasons, maybe, but like,
Yeah.
it's still, you know, like a touch point for that.
It's not as fun as Get Out, but like they make sense as a pairing.
Yeah.
So,
and if you like black sci-fi in terms of writing, Nnedi Okofor is a Nigerian writer who wrote this series called Who Fears Death.
mm-hmm.
It's not African American; it's an African sci-fi series. She also created a book named Binti, or I think it's Binti. But she's like a Nigerian sci-fi writer. And so if you're into that,
Chris didn't get the memo about only like we strictly stick to 3 recommendations, but it would feel inappropriate for me during the episode about Get Out to silence him and a Nigerian author.
Okay, I'll replace that with Skeleton Key. You
gotta leave Skeleton Key. That was essential.
Yeah, that was a banger. That was a banger for recommendation.
Kate Hudson, you kidding me? Let's go.
Yeah, come on.
I actually, when I was looking up articles about Get Out, I remember there was like a like, I think like Google like autofilled it or something, but it was like one of the things that filled in was like, is Skeleton Key or is Get Out a ripoff of Skeleton Key? Which like it definitely isn't, but it's like it's really funny that movie got mentioned with it.
Yeah, there's similarities, but it's not a ripoff.
No, yeah, I mean that's insane. But
yeah, but that's why I thought of it, because it is a similar, like, you know, I won't give it away, but it's similar. Yeah.
I gotta go watch it. Amazing. So those are recommendations. Because we have, you know, been here for quite some time, we won't run through them again. But I will, you know, say thank you again to David and Chris for joining. This has been, I think, a really insightful and thoughtful conversation about an amazing movie. You know, we knew that this one would run long because there's so much to talk about here. Absolutely an essential movie that everyone needs to check out. Maybe the definitive movie of, you know, this generation of films or whatever it may be.
At least horror wise. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. At least horror wise, time will tell. But again, thank you guys. This has been a ton of fun.
It was a great time.
It's a blast.
Absolute blast. Well, Screenagers, we will be back next week with another essential movie. We're going to be ending season 4 with the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So it's going to be fun. We got fun stuff here in November. So obviously next week we'll be kicking off the trilogy talk with Fellowship of the Rings. Should be a ton of fun, and we'll take it through to Thanksgiving with Return of the King. So
nice.
Join us here next week for Fellowship of the Rings. Should be another great discussion about another great movie, and we'll see you there. And as always, I will see all of you guys in the wasteland. Bye, everyone.